Today, we are learning some new details following reports of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing some detailed military plans in a second Signal group chat that included his wife, a lawyer, and his brother. Multiple sources telling CNN Hegseth revealed strike plans against Houthi targets in Yemen, similar to what was shared in that other group chat, which came to light after the editor of The Atlantic was mistakenly added to it. We've also learned that Hegseth directly addressed the matter with President Trump during a phone call last night. Earlier today, the president defended Hegseth.
He's doing a great job. It's just fake news. They just bring up stories. I guess it sounds like disgruntled employees. You know, he was put there to get rid of a lot of bad people, and that's what he's doing. So you don't always have friends when you do that.
The revelation of a second Signal chat emerging as some of Hegseth's closest advisors, several of whom were fired last week, are warning that the Pentagon has become dysfunctional under Hegseth's leadership. Both Hegseth and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt railed against those accusations.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations.
The president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth, who is doing a phenomenal job leading the Pentagon. And this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement.
With us now to talk more about this is John Bolton. He served as National Security Advisor during President Trump's first term. How bad do you think this is, I wonder, having his wife, his brother, his lawyer included on what sources describe as military plans of these Houthi strikes, similar to what came to light during that first Signal chat scandal?
Well, I think after people got over the disbelief at the first Signal chat group, it's no surprise there are others. What makes this one worse and different is that it's kind of a friends and family Signal chat group, none of whom have any need to know what's been conveyed about potential strikes in Yemen before they actually happen. I mean, it speaks to a lack of judgment on Hegseth's part. And when you look at the controversy over the people recently being fired, by the way, all of whom are people he hired within the past 90 days, it really gives the picture of a Secretary of Defense who's a lightweight, a dilettante. And that's not the kind of person you want as a Secretary of Defense under any circumstances, but particularly not in the challenging environment we find ourselves in today.
Let's talk about some of those top aides who are gone. I think some of whom, were it not for Hegseth or someone like Hegseth being in the position he's in, would not have had the positions they had at the Pentagon. But Senior Advisor Dan Caldwell, Deputy Chief of Staff Darren Selnick, Chief of Staff to the Deputy Secretary of Defense Colin Carroll. What's the effect of departures at a high level like that?
Well, as I say, I think he was responsible for hiring all of them. I mean, I think he had connections with them. He also lost his own chief of staff, who is either being fired or moved somewhere else in the Defense Department. I think what it says to the rest of that very big building and its partners around the world that they're just not serious in the Secretary of Defense's office. They don't have their act together managing a very small group of people. How's somebody like that ever going to lead the entire Pentagon? It's what you get when you don't really care about qualifications for jobs like that, when you're not picking people who are experienced, when your major qualification is personal fealty to Donald Trump. That's what he's got in Hegseth. That's why he's sticking with him. But it's not what you need to do the job.
His chief of staff resigning from his position. We're waiting to see if he lands somewhere else at the Pentagon. But in a Politico op-ed, John Oliot, the former chief Pentagon spokesman who resigned last week, said that dysfunction is now a major distraction and that it's hard to see how Hegseth remains in his role for much longer. Do you think that Hegseth should step down?
Well, by the way, Oliot is the fifth person in his inner circle who's now resigned. I think Hegseth should resign. I don't think he's going to. He may leave at some point because I think he's used up his bank account with Donald Trump. Trump doesn't want to have to waste his resources defending his people, and that's now what he's doing on Hegseth. But I think Trump is bound and determined not to show weakness, which is what he's worried he would do if he fires Hegseth or anybody else. So I think Hegseth has a shelf life of undetermined length, but it's not going to be much longer, would be my guess. 3 months, 4 months, something like that, likely.
You hear the talking point, we just heard it from Hegseth, Leavitt, and Trump himself, which is that they're blaming people who are just upset that he's trying to implement institutional change. What do you think of that argument?
Well, again, these 5 people are all people he brought in and who have said they're in favor of the change that he's trying to make. They just don't think he's qualified to do it. I think it's a very weak response when Hegseth can't even manage and hold together the people he himself is responsible for hiring. It's sort of like the same problem his boss seems to have.
John Bolton, always great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He's the Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. What's your response to that defiant display from Secretary Hegseth?
This is a guy that's in so far over his head that he didn't say anything there about denying that he did this gross, sloppy misuse of classified information, sharing now with his family members. We heard about the misuse earlier when this information was shared with other senior members of the administration. It is way past time that Hegseth should either quit or be fired. And I think the question is going to be, well, will my Republican Senate friends, who I know care about our national security, how many more examples of chaos at the Pentagon before they will find their voice and be willing to step up and speak out on the fact that this guy should no longer be Secretary of Defense?
You know the intelligence community, you know intelligence. How serious, Senator, was this breach compared to other cases of highly classified information being mishandled?
Well, let me give you the best example. I was a couple of weeks ago down in Virginia Beach. I had a big town hall. Many of the people at the town hall knew people that were on the Truman, which is the aircraft carrier that launched these attacks, or the planes that were launched from the aircraft carrier against the Houthis. They knew members on the Truman. They were outraged because they knew if that information had got out, their loved ones could have been, frankly, put in harm's way in an awful, awful way. So this is such an obvious case of sloppiness, carelessness, not respect for classified information. And this is what is happening, I fear, all across the IC, is this group of individuals come in, try to politicize our intelligence, and frankly, in many cases, have put leadership in place that's incompetent.
Is it that serious, you think, Senator, that Hegseth potentially should be charged with some sort of crime for violating top national security secrets?
I'll leave that for lawyers to make that determination. I know on the common sense judgment criteria, if you're putting out attack plans while our planes are in the sky and you're sharing that, not it's bad enough that you're sharing it on that chat with the national security advisor and the vice president, but the idea that you are sharing that information with family members who have no basis for having exposure to any of that kind of information, no matter what the secretary says, his comments just don't pass the smell test.
I don't think any of those people on that group chat, that second group chat, had top secret security clearances and were qualified to hear that kind of sensitive information about war plans that were still underway. During President Trump's first term, as you probably remember, he was often quick to remove officials he lost confidence in. But right now, the White House says the president stands firmly behind Secretary Hegseth. What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me that this is a president without any boundaries and without any other adults in the room that say this is, not about the president's feeling at a moment, but it is about the men and women who protect our country in the Defense Department, in the armed services, who I can pretty much assure you don't have much confidence. You saw some of the folks who left this weekend or are fired, saying that there's total chaos at the department. And that creeps through if our men and women in uniform start to lose confidence in their leadership. And I'm afraid that is happening real time.
I think it's significant, Senator, that even Secretary Hegseth's closest advisors are sounding the alarm about his judgment and the turmoil inside the Pentagon right now, and it is severe. How do you think America's adversaries are reading all of this chaos?
Well, it's a great opportunity for China. It's a great opportunity for Russia to continue to push against Ukraine. Since the president in less than 100 days has managed to alienate virtually every ally we have around the world, whether it's through his tariff policies or his kind of pettiness with Canada, threatening to throw them out of the Five Eyes. I worry that what had been our strength, Wolf, for literally decades was that we had friends and allies around the world that could count on us. They already had that trust, I think, undermined. Then you've got the economic travails with the tariffs, and now you've got what appears to be a kind of a Keystone Cops group of leadership over the Defense Department. None of that bodes well for the safety of our country.
So is there evidence that close U.S. allies, NATO allies, are now reluctant to share very sensitive intelligence information with the U.S.?
I am not going to comment on that other than the fact that we'll never fully know, because you don't know what's not shared. I do know there have been concerns about how our country is going to treat classified information. I know people, within the intelligence community are aghast, not only at this mistreatment of intelligence, but also think about the random firing of General Hawk at the NSA and Cyber Command. He was extraordinarily well respected. There's still no explanation of that other than the fact that right-wing conspiracy theorist who denied 9/11 and said school shootings are made up, Laura Loomer, came in with this list, and suddenly a General Hawk who's well respected around the world is fired without cause. These are not great signals to send at this challenging time.
Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, thanks as usual for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, I want to talk to you about some news here in Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly used a second Signal group chat to discuss sensitive military plans with members of his family, his lawyer. You called the first leaked Signal chat a, quote, huge mistake. Do you have confidence in Secretary Hegseth's judgment?
Well, the question is this chat prior to the one that was leaked out, or did he continue to use the Signal chat group after that happened? And so I'm not sure the timing of it was. If it was something that he did prior to, okay, he should have learned his lesson now with what happened with the Mike Waltz incident. But if he did it afterwards, yeah, I would have concerns because it's already been burned by it once. I don't think you need to get burned by it twice. I think you should learn from your mistakes.
And I understand your point about the timing, but the principles of the issue don't change in terms of discussing sensitive military details on Signal, particularly with people like his wife, who, as far as I know, doesn't have a security clearance.
Right.
I'm not sure, but I don't believe she does. Does that concern you?
If in fact he did discuss what's called top secret or things that only need to be discussed inside a SCIF with his wife, if she doesn't have that kind of security briefing, yes, it would concern me. And it should be a lesson to everybody in the administration and everybody actually in the federal government. A lot of the federal agencies use Signal because it's supposed to be an encrypted, very secure application. The fact that these things are being leaked now call into question how secure Signal really is.
Right, how secure Signal is, and we know that foreign hackers try to get into the phones of top officials. There's all kinds of concerns from intelligence officials. Congressman Carlos Jimenez, thank you for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
There is now another scandal involving Signal, the encrypted messaging app, and plans about military strikes. The New York Times first reported that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, revealed sensitive details about strikes on Yemen on the app, which included that text exchange included his wife and his personal lawyer. Plus, 3 senior aides to Hegseth who were put on leave last week have now been fired. And perhaps the most damning part of all this is a former aide and close ally took to Politico and wrote a piece decrying that it was, quote, a month from hell inside the Pentagon. Here's what John Olliott, who's a former spokesman now former, of the Pentagon said. From leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings, the dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership, given that it's hard to see Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth remaining in his role for much longer. Now, to be clear, the White House is saying that the president is sticking by the embattled Pentagon chief, and Hegseth went on the offense this morning.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter. This group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with access to grind.
I have some very smart reporters here at the table with me to discuss this. CNN's Stephen Collinson and Natasha Bertrand, who covers the Pentagon for us. Let's just start where Pete Hegseth ended there, which is the people who were fired, and presumably the people he is talking about. They're not just kind of employees that he inherited when he joined the Pentagon. These are people that he chose, the quote-unquote disgruntled employees, and many of them have been very close friends with him. I'm told almost like brothers for a decade.
This is a really, really important point here, because Dan Caldwell, who was one of the employees who was fired last week, he's a senior advisor to Secretary Hegseth. He has known and worked with Hegseth for about a decade now. They date back to the years working together at Concerned Veterans for America, which is a veterans organization. Same with the other individual who was fired that was part of Hegseth's inner circle, Darren Selnick, who was the deputy chief of staff at the Pentagon, also worked with him at Concerned Veterans for America. And so these are people that Hegseth brought on. These are people that he hired and brought into the Defense Department. The same goes with John Olliott, the person who wrote that op-ed last night, that scathing op-ed saying that the last 5 weeks or so at the Pentagon have been absolute chaos. This is really a message that they are trying to send here, in addition to the statement that was released by Dan Caldwell, by Darren Selnick, and by the third official who was fired last week, Colin Carroll, essentially saying that their character and their reputations have been slandered here, and that any notion that they have done something wrong by leaking information to the press, which is one of the rationales that we were given last week when it came out that they were fired, is flat out untrue, something that John Olliott also wrote in his op-ed. And so I think that now we're seeing Hegseth respond in the only way that he knows how to do, which is to attack the media for reporting on something that he actually has not denied the substance of, which was the fact that he had the second signal chat set up, that his wife, his lawyer, and his brother were in it, and there was no really rational explanation for why they should be read in on a very sensitive military operation.
And so there are so many sort of tentacles to this. One, of course, and perhaps the most important, is what was this document? How sensitive was it? And the people on the text chain, whether they should have had access to it. But then the other is just chaos, dysfunction, whatever John Olliott, who also left on Friday, describes at the highest levels of the Pentagon. I mean, this is Game of Thrones, House of Cards, like, pick your Washington show or some kind of palace intrigue that you would never think would happen in real life is happening real time.
Right, and I think that you've got two dimensions here. You've got the political and the grave national security implications. What you saw there on that clip was the reason that Hegseth got picked in the first place, because he can do the defense, the theatrics. He was there at the Easter egg roll, performing in many ways the way that the president wanted to perform.
That's right.
When he picked him, using the classic Trumpian defense. It's the swamp against us, even though, as you were saying, the facts don't support that. On the politics of this, Trump for now is standing by him, but as we know in the past, that the president stands by people until he doesn't. I don't think he can let him go despite the implications of all this, because if he does, he would be admitting a mistake, that he picked someone unsuitable for the Pentagon in the first place. But to your first point, look at the backdrop. The worsening international situation. We've got the peace talks with Ukraine, talks with Iran, the building clash with China over tariffs that threatens to go into something bigger, into a superpower clash. If you have that level of dysfunction at the top of the Pentagon, from someone who perhaps doesn't have the confidence of everyone in the ranks, despite this conceit that he's the defense secretary for the enlisted man and woman, that is going to be a problem.
And the fact that it was given to the New York Times, you and our colleagues have done great reporting since then. I am told that is one of the reasons why Trump is with him for now, because he can look at that and say, oh, just kind of like what we heard from Secretary Hegseth. Oh, it's just, the media out to get him, and it looks like a hit job, and these are people who don't want us to succeed, so on and so forth. The question, to your point, Steve, is how long is that going to last?
Yeah, I think that the question of how much patience the White House is going to have with Secretary Hegseth as things like this continue to come out is a really relevant one here, because it is true that the White House does not necessarily want to go through another confirmation hearing, right? It was very, very messy the first time around. It was very difficult to get Pete Hegseth through. They used a ton of political capital to do that. But at the same time, Hegseth keeps doing these things that make him look very amateurish and that are raising questions not only among people who were in his closest inner circle about his judgment, but also increasingly people in the White House who are saying, why does this keep happening? Why is this the second time that we're seeing this very sensitive classified national security information apparently being put into a signal messaging group?
Yeah. And then sort of the broader question about the chaos well beyond the Pentagon and how things are going down. I just want to remind people, because it is like drinking from a fire hose, about just some of the other examples that have only happened over the past several days. The president's pick for acting IRS commissioner, he was ousted, I should say, just days after his appointment. The Trump White House apparently are blaming this whole confrontation that they're having with Harvard, which is now escalating because the president is doubling down, on a mistake, that an official mistakenly sent the letter to Harvard in the first place with the threats. And then, of course, the Trump advisors, sort of what's going on behind the scenes, trying to take advantage of Peter Navarro's absence to push for a tariff pause, which was a great story by Josh Dawsey in the Wall Street Journal. Again, these are just examples in the past few days.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the administration, a lot of people were talking about how this was different this time. It was planned. Trump had the people he wanted. He knew what he wanted to do, and that was true to some extent. The early rollout of all those executive orders was far more professional than it was during the start of the first Trump term. But now you're seeing administrations always reflect the person at the top, in my experience, and this is the way Trump has run his business, his life, his first administration, competing forces, and that is naturally going to sort of erode into this kind of chaos. When you're in the middle of an administration, it's often difficult to spot the turning points because the drama is so much. In this administration, the Trump era, that's even harder. But we could look back on some of the things that are going on now, and the president's impulsive imposition and then taking off of tariffs, as it may be a motif for the entire term. Yeah, and the fact that he is just full speed ahead, and they are going to make mistakes when you do that, and they are making mistakes. Thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.